Welcome back, everybody. It's a pleasure to kick off session 9, our second last session for this 3-day event. We're very pleased to have you here. If you're just joining for the first time, you've come along to the change management session, which is all about how can we apply our new understandings relating to animal welfare, which will be really, really interesting. And I'm looking forward to the speakers in this session. Sorry, I'm just rapidly trying to stop my computer running an upgrade. There we go, we'll just shut that down. I want to quickly let you know if you've got questions for any of the speakers during this session, you can use the question section of your control panel toolbar to put them in via text, and then our wonderful session chair, who I'm about to introduce, will be able to ask those of the speakers in the 15-minute question and answer time at the end of our session. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Alan Youngman from the Animal Welfare Science Centre at the University of Melbourne, who will be chairing this session on change management. Over to you, Alan.
All right, thank you, Mia. And good morning and good afternoon to people listening, wherever you are. And yes, as Mia pointed out, this session we will hear from 3 speakers, and we will hear some new ways about how we might measure welfare, how we might think about welfare, and also how we may encourage the community to be engaged in animal welfare measurements. So our first speaker you will be hearing from is Shari Cohen, who is a colleague of mine in the Animal Welfare Science Centre at the University of Melbourne. So Shari, go ahead with the presentation.
Hello, my name is Dr. Shari Cohen, and I'll be talking today about a practical framework to promote change and improvement in animal welfare. This work is based on a UNSW 3Rs and animal welfare grant project. It has approval for human ethics work through University of Melbourne and forms part of a PhD program at the University of Sydney. Supervisors for this project are Dr. Sabrina Lomax, Dr. Joy Becker, and Dr. Lauren Hemsworth. And collaborators include Dr. Josh Slater, Dr. Kate Brandis, and Dr. Troy Tripovich. The idea behind this project came from both personal and industry experiences. So is specifically in the research and teaching industry, but the idea is that this project can be applied across a multitude of animal care and use industries. In the research and teaching industry, we have something called the 3Rs principles, which many of you may be familiar with. And this is the application of replacement, refinement, and reduction of animal use in research and teaching. It's been around since 1959. It was created by Russell and Birch, who were 2 scientists concerned about the way that we were managing and using animals in research. We also here in Australia have the National Health Research Medical Council, which has released animal welfare best practice requirements and guidelines in order to be followed. And as well, both at the institutional level and across the industry, there are several training programs available and various types of support. However, despite our principles, our requirements, and this training and support, anecdotally and personally, we found that there's a very slow or limited uptake of 3Rs and animal welfare improvements across the industry. And in some cases, there's almost a tendency to almost slide back to using animals, whereas traditionally in some areas we didn't use animals in research and teaching. So this is a very different outlook to say where the European Union is going and the USA that are trying to actively phase out the use of animals and encourage that use, or at least has made the commitment to do so. And on doing a bit of a literature review and some background research, I found that this anecdotal experience is actually mirrored in a few surveys. So we have our 2019 implementation of 3Rs in Australia, undertaken by the NHMRC, and there were some key issues highlighted. And these issues, interestingly enough, included a lack of application of the 3Rs and animal welfare principles. And this is a comparison to other jurisdictions overseas. And then we also had some key gaps in knowledge and a lack of info. Now, not only did we have a lack of info as to what was happening in the industry, but we also didn't know what we didn't know, and we also didn't know things that we should have known. And doing a bit more research internationally, I found that this is mirrored in other jurisdictions and other animal care and use industries. It is not exclusive to just research and teaching. However, the degree and the differences and nuances are a bit different depending on where you're looking and which countries. However, the outcomes are the same, meaning that we have a theory of animal welfare and a theory of bettering and improving work with animals. However, our outcomes are still falling short. So some of the challenges and questions that were posed about, okay, well, we know we have a gap as to what is supported versus what is done. And how do we start to bridge that gap and take industry along on that journey? Because that is a critical aspect, which often in many change plans or types of industry initiatives kind of fail to forget is that you need to take the entirety of the industry along with you. So the idea was to bring together some change management, behavior change, and co-design strategies to see if we could bridge this gap and uplift welfare. And hopefully the aim is, can we develop a repeatable framework to replicate outcomes and success? And now these strategies were specifically chosen because anecdotally they have been used in the past and had seemed to have good outcomes. However, they have not been tested in a research setting, and also the outcomes were quite subjective. So we wanted to try and go ahead and decide, okay, were these change management, behavior change, and co-design strategies actually helpful? Or did we have our own bias happening here? And if so, which ones might be most helpful? And what other strategies could we potentially apply in the future? The idea is a very simple framework, utilizing benchmarking, consensus workshops and training, development of guidance materials, release to the industry this information, and then the idea is to review and assess. More specifically, we're looking at determine effective ways to work with industry to improve animal welfare, increase animal welfare literacy, and the 3 R's using the elements of behavior change, co-design, and change management techniques. Specifically, when it comes to benchmarking, we're looking at both individual and institutional surveys. So we're looking at people in the industry, what they say, what their attitudes are, their knowledge are, their gaps and the wins, as well as what institutions think that their gaps, their wins, and where their knowledge and information lies as well. And the idea is to compare those two groups to some extent and see if we have the gaps at the individual level, the institutional level, and if those gaps are the same or different, to start to understand what that narrative is and if there's a dialogue that is missing between those two groups. Another aim is to identify practical animal welfare indicators via consensus. I term this our top 10 via taxa. And so this came about because amongst different individuals, different research projects, and different institutions, everybody was looking at sometimes very different animal welfare indicators for the same research and for the same kinds of projects. And it's been found through a bit of a research and literature review as well that while we have a very long list of animal welfare indicators that are available, some have been validated, some have not, we don't really have a constellation that we can draw from where we're able to go ahead and say, okay, these are our top 10 things we should be looking for on a day-to-day basis or on regular animal checks. This is what we should be teaching people coming into the industry, because while for some of us being able to identify a compromised animal can be easier, there are some where it's quite difficult, and having specific collection of animal welfare indicators can be very useful. It also has the useful application of being able to plug into different animal welfare assessment frameworks. So whether that's developing an auditing scheme or even better utilizing frameworks like the 5 domains. We also want to look at the best way to train for improved animal literacy and how to better support the 3 R's. And we want to pilot the Grimace scales as a project This is because we know there is a lot of information available online. There is a lot of online and face-to-face training. There's even some training available in the formal frameworks of diplomas and bachelor degrees and other sorts of more formal tertiary education. However, we still seem to have this gap between what people say and what people actually do or feel that they can do. And importantly, we also wanted to provide easy to use practical guidance on alternatives and refinements specific for Australia and New Zealand so that we can try and drive and improve and uplift 3Rs. And from this work, ideally coming up with a 2.0 project where we can identify areas for future work, support, and research. So a little bit about our timelines. We've already have our funding awarded, initial funding. We've got our ethics approval, and we've started data collection. And the benchmarking survey will be available through a QR code at the end of this presentation. So if you work in the animal research or teaching industry, and you've been working in the last 24 months in any capacity, you would be eligible. So please feel free to scan that QR code and be aware that it takes about 15 minutes to complete the survey. So maybe something to do during the break or after the conference one of these days. We like to analyze the data, hopefully the middle of next year, and have a final report for that data so that we can give some initial reporting in October to be released with the aim of having formal open access publications and materials available publicly from end of 2023 onwards. In general, our outcomes and what we're really hoping to achieve with this project is to improve animal welfare literacy and training in animal welfare in the 3Rs. We want to improve the actual application of the 3Rs in animal welfare. So we start to bridge that gap between what people know, what people say, and what people do. And we're hoping to develop some practical and tangible animal welfare improvements for the industry to start using immediately. Now, this has multiple things. One, it has immediate benefit for the industry, but it also helps keep industry on board. It shows them that when we're doing our research, we're able to actually do something with it and apply it and offer them some solutions, or at least the beginning of some solutions. And like I said, we're doing this through the selection of some animal welfare indicators for practical use by animal carers, and also the Grimace Scales workshops, for examples, that will be run are also practical, tangible things, and via that replacement and refinement guidelines. The intention for this work is also to trial some co-design and change management techniques that have been learned over the years and have been used in different settings to see if we can improve animal welfare using those techniques. And see if via all of this together, working with industry, working with these different techniques and training, to see if we can overall create an uplift in animal welfare across the industry. For the future, with this work, once this initial part of the project has been done, I call this our 1.0 version, I'd like to identify areas for more work and research within the industry. So I'd like a 2.0 version that builds from this work, where we can deep dive into potentially further impacts of training, further impacts of the work that's been created, reviewing and reassessing what we've done, as well as looking at perhaps a 2.0 version of the monitoring indicators. So rather than just looking at day-to-day indicators, perhaps it's under specific scenarios or under specific conditions that we need to look at. Also, we can start to develop decision trees and different frameworks where we can start to incorporate how we can better assess welfare at the cage or pen or paddock level. And I like to apply this framework to other industries because I think it could be used quite easily in the livestock and wildlife industries, as well as any animal care and use industry. And I'd like to find out if there are other ways we can employ and research other strategies that perhaps we can borrow from other disciplines using this multidisciplinary approach to try and improve welfare, both at the industry level, but also at the day-to-day interface of that human-animal interactions. Hopefully we can find some more funding either here in Oceania or internationally, and we would really love to have some collaborations both locally and internationally, and ideally even perhaps consider an international comparison to see if there's differences and nuances between Australia, New Zealand, and other areas of the world. And of course, the sort of things that we can build on, can go on from there. So I'd like to thank UFAW very much for having me today. I'd like to thank my supervisors and also my collaborators for the work that we've been doing the past few months, and also UNSW for the generous grant that they have bequeathed to us. Please find the survey code here. It is an anonymous benchmarking survey for anybody that is in the research and teaching industry with animals. You can fill it out. Like I said, it takes about 15 minutes. And this work is really meant to be for the industry and by the industry. We're really keen to have other people get involved, so please contact me, shari.cohen@unimelb.edu.au for more information or to get involved, especially if you've got refinement or replacement techniques that you'd like to share with us or any ideas or feedback. And if you fill out the anonymous benchmarking survey, you're able to go into a draw for a $75 Australian dollar gift certificate at the end. So thank you again so much for your time and for listening. Thank you again so much, UFAW, for giving us the wonderful opportunity to showcase this work and to pose some different approaches to animal welfare improvements. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their conference. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Shari, for that interesting talk and pointing out the differences in how we might approach measuring animal welfare in research animals compared to some of the other industries. So I'd just like to point out, if you have any questions for Shari, please pop them in the chat box on your right-hand side on the screen, and we will discuss the questions after the three presentations of this session. So the next presentation will be by Karen Luke, who is from the Central Queensland University here in Australia, and really talking about some new solutions, and maybe if we want new solutions, we have to have some new ways of thinking about animal welfare. So yeah, let's listen to Karen's talk.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. My name is Karen Luke, and I am a PhD candidate from Central Queensland University in Australia. For a long time now, I have wondered why poor animal welfare persists when we have so many brilliant people working on the problem. Why is it that with so much goodwill, intelligence, and hard work, why are we still struggling to solve this problem? While no means the only person to voice this idea, I feel Robert Pirsig expressed it well in the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance when he said, if a factory is torn down but the rationality which produced it is left standing, then that rationality will simply produce another factory. My fear is that while ever we don't question the rationality of our scientific approach, maybe we are tearing down and rebuilding the same factory over and over again. And my hope is that by exploring these ideas together, we will come closer to solving the wicked problem of poor animal welfare. To begin, I would like to introduce an ancient but persistent idea that perhaps has influenced more of human thinking and Western society than any other idea. This idea has been traced back to Plato and is the concept of the great chain of being. The great chain of being is a schema for understanding the universe. It places all animate and inanimate things into a hierarchy. God is at the top, or for those who don't believe in God, kings or humans are at the top, and everything else fills the hierarchy down to where stone lies at the bottom, forming an unbroken chain. Hand in hand with the notion that humans are superior to all other beings and things, is the idea that animals and the planet exist to serve the needs of humans. This conceptualization of the world is found in Christianity. So in the Western world, at least, the notion of domination is added to the concept of a hierarchy of beings. The ideas of hierarchy and domination can be seen not only in religion, but also in politics, economics, and education. And unsurprisingly, they can also be seen in modern incarnations of the scientific method. Of course, there are other assumptions underpinning the scientific method, assumptions such as there is only one objective reality, that the scientist is a detached, value-free observer, and that the world behaves in a linear fashion. My feeling is that the assumptions themselves are not problematic, but the fact that they remain largely unarticulated in the literature is. Let me explain why. Ideas, such as the Great Chain of Being, offer a simple framework to explain the world and how everything fits together. Such ideas help us make sense of things and act as a convenient shortcut for interpreting the world and events. Depending on your discipline, you might refer to such a set of ideas as a schema, a paradigm, or a framework. The key point is it is a shortcut for understanding the world. And while a schema can be really helpful, once it is internalized so that we are no longer aware of it and its assumptions, then instead of being a shortcut to help us interpret the world, it instead begins to shape how we see the world. Consider this idea with regard to the scientific method. For most of us, the concept of objectivity is relatively salient, but perhaps the notions of hierarchy and domination less so. This can lead to confounding. Just about all of us will be highly aware of the notion of confounding variables, but I feel we are all less aware of the potential for confounding assumptions within our scientific paradigms. In addition, scientists have identified that the tight alignment of the largely unarticulated assumptions that underpin science and society work to maintain the status quo, which can be a good thing in terms of creating stability, but not so good if you are attempting to bring about change. So let's have a look at how unarticulated assumptions can shape how we see problems and their solutions. As a horse welfare researcher, I will use the example of crib biting in horses. Crib biting is generally thought of as a coping mechanism for horses who are confined and isolated. That is, horses who are housed in a stable. Many people consider crib biting a vice or a character flaw in the horse and something for which the horse must be cured. If you Google crib biting treatments, you will find 2 large universities from the US offer their suggested solutions. These solutions include tight collars that go around the horse's neck, muzzles, electric wire on surfaces to prevent the horse from grasping the surface with their teeth, and surgery where a bilateral neurectomy and myectomy are performed so the horse is physically incapable of performing the behaviour, although the surgery only has a success rate of around 60%. Also, to give these university-endorsed solutions context, a recent paper has shown that horses find the practice of individual stabling as an intense stressor that leads to short and long-term immunocompromise. Another researcher has demonstrated that the horse is as motivated to crib as he or she is to eat. Therefore, if crib biting is a coping mechanism, a pertinent question is what is the net welfare outcome of preventing it? What do these solutions tell us about how science sees the horse and the issue of crib biting? Firstly, if we look at the diagram, we see crib biting is viewed as a linear problem. The horse cribs, we employ a solution to force its prevention, most commonly something that inflicts pain on the horse, such as a tight collar or an electric shock or both, and the cribbing stops. Essentially, we impose something on the horse so that the horse better suits our needs. It is a fix and forget approach. Examining this approach more closely reveals that we believe the horse is an object that we may do things to. We can shock the horse or alter the horse's anatomy to shape the horse so it is more to our liking. These solutions also suggest that there is one objective reality, and most commonly that reality is our reality. There is little consideration given to the horse's reality in any of these solutions. And finally, these solutions show that we have a very narrow focus on the problem. This leads us to see the problem as within the horse rather than perhaps something that might be outside the horse, such as how the horse is managed. Now, I mentioned before that having a tight alignment of our unarticulated assumptions helps maintain the status quo. Let's consider that now. From these solutions, let's ask ourselves, what has actually changed following any one of these solutions? Has horse welfare changed? I would argue no, or maybe it might be worse. Has horse management changed? No, the horse still lives in a stable. Has our understanding of the horse changed? No, we still see the horse as an object whose purpose is to fulfill our needs. Has our relationship with the horse changed? No, the horse is still seen as a tool to achieve a goal. Might be to win a race or a competition or provide a photo opportunity for Instagram. It is clear that little change has occurred, so the status quo has been maintained. I would now like to introduce an alternative scientific approach called systems thinking. Time is short, so this is a necessarily incomplete account, but I hope it will give you a taste of systems thinking and inspire you to learn a little more about it. The last slide contains some texts about systems thinking that are accessible and, to me at least, quite fascinating. Systems thinking seeks to understand the world by examining how different parts of the world interact. It is about process rather than object. It is a holistic approach that sees the world as a dynamic, self-organizing system. Its assumptions are very different to those of traditional science, and its roots are found in biology, physics, and computer science, with an Austrian-born biologist, Ludwig von Bertalanffy, one of the first general systems theorists, first presenting his work at a conference in 1937. Today, systems thinking is recognised by the UN as a core competency for tackling climate change, and it is being used more and more to help solve wicked problems in healthcare and education. So, am I suggesting systems thinking has all the answers? No. But I am suggesting that including systems thinking in the mix of animal welfare science and adopting a more scientifically diverse approach might create opportunities for new solutions to be developed. So how can systems thinking help? Without going through them individually, you can see that systems thinking has a very different set of assumptions underpinning it. And if we choose to, we can also see that the assumptions of traditional science and systems thinking are complementary, in so much as the built-in weaknesses of one approach are countered by the strengths of the other. For example, where a weakness of systems thinking might be that it is too big picture, traditional science can fill that gap with a more granular view. To me, one paradigm is not necessarily superior to the other. To me, they both have important things to offer. Constructing the perfect set of assumptions on which to build a scientific paradigm is not the goal, because perfection is an illusion. Instead, the power comes from recognizing our assumptions, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, and then choosing the best approach for the problem we are trying to solve. So let's take a look at systems thinking at work. Returning to our crib biting example, we see a horse-human map. A fundamental of systems thinking is mapping, and here is a very simplified horse-human systems map with crib biting highlighted. When we look at this map, we can see that it is not only horse elements, but also human elements that contribute, to a greater or lesser extent, to crib biting. It also shows that there are many points at which we could intervene in the system to address crib biting. And that is just how a systems thinker would approach the problem. They would first map and ponder the system, observe how the system works, and then plan and implement an intervention. They would then monitor the system, alert for both expected and unexpected changes. And finally, they would reflect on this process to see what can be learnt, and if necessary, repeat the cycle many times to gently improve the system. This process is known as adaptive management. In this example, a systems thinker may choose to turn the horse out into a paddock with a friend as their first system intervention. Unlike the traditional approach, the scientist using systems thinking sees a system with a problem rather than a problem horse. And rather than imposing a solution to modify the horse and the horse's behaviour, the scientist seeks to understand and shape the system to achieve the desired outcome. We can see from this how the scientific approach shapes how we see the problem, where we look for answers, and what we deem as acceptable or unacceptable solutions. So now we need to ask ourselves the same questions of this systems thinking approach that we asked of the traditional science solutions. What has changed? Horse welfare. It is likely that has improved. The horse has gone from isolation and confinement to a paddock with a friend. Horse management, as already mentioned, that has changed. Understanding of the horse. From the process of mapping and monitoring, we now have greater insight into the horse-human system and what the horse needs to have good welfare. Horse-human relationship. Through learning more about the horse and seeing the horse as a being rather than an object, it is likely this has also improved, with a stronger bond being formed. As mentioned earlier, systems thinking does not hold all the answers, but I believe actively seeking to create greater scientific diversity in how we approach animal welfare might hold at least some of them. Adopting scientific diversity in animal welfare, recognising and articulating the assumptions underlying our work and their strengths and weaknesses, gives us the power to select the most appropriate scientific approach for any given question we are trying to solve. It also frees us to partner with other researchers and to use our skills in a complementary way, so we smooth out the weaknesses in our own work. I sincerely hope this talk has given you some small thing to think about, and maybe even something to spark a conversation with a colleague. Everyone working in animal welfare is trying to solve a hideously wicked problem. Scientific diversity and systems thinking are not magic cures, but they may just give us new insights and more tools to tackle the problem. Thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, great talk by Karen, and a real challenge. It's really challenging our thought to think about science maybe somewhat differently. I just made a mistake. When you have any questions, you can pop them in the questions box, not in the chat box. So if you have any things that make you think about some of the challenges that Karen put in front of you, just put your questions in the questions box. Okay, and then the last talk in this session today, for this particular session, by Rashmi Gokhale from the University of Edinburgh, and also an independent veterinary consultant in India, who will talk about some of the community engagement needed for preventative healthcare in stray dogs and cats. Yeah, let's another interesting talk I'll look forward to listening to.
Namaste. My name is Dr. Rashmi Gokhale and I am an MSc student of International Animal Welfare Ethics and Law, a distance learning course at the University of Edinburgh, and an independent veterinary consultant working in India. This presentation is regarding Project Meher, a case study done on community engagement for preventive healthcare of stray-owned dogs and cats by veterinarians. The objective of doing this pilot project was to create community dog and cat population management model through community participation and intervention. So our target species were stray-owned dogs and cats, that is community dogs and cats. Our target human community was community dog and cat feeders, foster carers and adopters. And our goal was to promote duty of care, which is beyond feeding. In most of the metropolitan cities of India, stray dogs and cats are routinely cared for by individual animal lovers. International Companion Animal Management Coalition works to promote responsible community dog and cat care. We have used their Combi model of human behavior change and slightly tweaked it to Indie Combi model. This is the original Combi model where owners vaccinate all their dogs and invest in sterilizing female dogs they do not want to breed from. And the model talks about the capability, opportunity, and motivation to change the behavior of the owner. In the Indie Combi model, the owner is replaced by animal feeder and the community health volunteer is replaced by private veterinary practitioner. We started this project by first mapping our stakeholders. So our primary stakeholder is the community dog or cat. The secondary stakeholder is its caregiver and the catalyst, that is the private veterinarian. Then we designed a process to promote preventive healthcare for community dogs and cats through private veterinary intervention. In the Indie Combi model, the private veterinarian is acting as a community health volunteer in deviation to the original Combi model. The veterinarian gets 3 opportunities to interact with the feeder to convince him on the importance of sterilization of the particular community dog and cat, its positive impact on the human community in which they are living, and to overall control the stray dog population. We have done 2 interventions under the pilot project: low cost basic veterinary care by a qualified veterinary practitioner, which is general health examination, deworming and vaccination of the community dog and cat, and humane community development, where private veterinary practitioners during these one-to-one interactions with the feeder has acted as a catalyst to promote responsible feeding and sterilization of community dog and cat. The ultimate aim of the project was administrative standing, which we suggest to the government as an intervention, where there should be a channel for cross-sharing of feeder database with municipal council for sterilization. This is an example of how we have promoted or created awareness about the low-cost basic veterinary care through Project Meher. Such awareness programs can be easily done and financially viable for the private veterinary practitioners as well. The ICL's guidelines on responsible feeding were very helpful at the time of this one-to-one interaction between the veterinarian and the animal caregiver. So we have tried addressing some queries of caregivers about what to feed the community dog, how to feed them, and where to feed them. This ultimately has an effect on reducing the conflict between resident welfare association and the feeders. Lastly, we did cost-benefit analysis of this model. This model serves the purpose of One Health, where prevention is better than cure. A question needs to be addressed whether vaccination has really prevented the incidence of core diseases in community dogs and cats. Feeder himself or herself is acting as a handler, which lowers the stress on dog and cat, and it could also eliminate need of dog catcher in the animal birth control program. But only experienced or routine feeder can be a good handler. Veterinarian is acting as a catalyst and a scientific advisor to the feeder or caregiver. This model is definitely economically viable for private veterinary practices. Indie Combi model and Combi model are human behavior change models. Therefore, they have unpredictable outcomes. There is lack of existing data sharing system between the private veterinary practice and the government, which needs to be addressed. But this model will definitely reduce load on animal charities because there is a direct interaction between veterinarian and feeder. However, how many number of animal caregivers or feeders will be ready to enroll in such models because there are no direct economic incentives involved. Thank you for listening. These are some of the references we have used to design, conduct, and implement the study, and also to make this presentation. Thank you once again.
Okay, an interesting talk, Rashmi, and again, making us think about some of the issues around stray dogs and cats, and how to improve their welfare and some of the challenges around that. So that is the end of the presentations in this session, and I'd like to invite the speakers to turn on their cameras, and we can have a bit of a discussion about some of the content of their presentations. Just looking at the questions, I think I'm a little confused between where I see the questions and when people can post the questions. I've just been told questions go in the chat, and then I need to look at them in the Q&A.
I think Shari's running a little bit late, but will hopefully join our session in a few minutes. So you can start with Rashmi and Karen, and hopefully Shari will join in.
Okay, well, let me just check for the questions to make sure I've got them out of the chat box. If people have any additional questions, pop them in the chat so we can have a look at them. Okay, right. So first of all, I've got a couple of questions for Shari, which I will hold over. Okay, Karen, I've got a comment here, and I must say that's not something that I know much about, because that's my background, but someone commented about a great talk. I think those who have a background in ecology will readily see the world in this system view, the system view that you presented. I wonder how discipline specific that silo problem is. Do you have any comments about that view? Is it more prevalent in ecology to look at systems thinking, you think, than in traditional animal welfare science?
I don't work in ecology, so I don't really know what happens there. But I imagine it probably does happen more in ecology, just because systems thinking is so widely recognised as a key component of solving climate problems. So I imagine it would be more in ecology than it is in animal welfare science. I just haven't really come across many or any sort of systems approaches in my field, which is to do with equine welfare.
Yeah, it was interesting you pointed it out, because immediately I started thinking about how you would look at certain issues, and I was going straight back into the traditional thinking of linear thinking of how we approach a problem. So it would definitely be a challenge to look at some of the welfare issues in a different way.
Yeah,
and it probably would need a bit of a brainstorming in a group situation more than anything, I imagine, just to get you out of that traditional linear thinking.
Absolutely, and one of the other aspects of a systems approach is creating that diversity of voices in the room as well. So what you say about having a brainstorming session, fits really well with it. So, and not only would it be brainstorming within your own discipline, but maybe inviting industry and a variety of different disciplines into the room to have that brainstorming session, so that you get that diversity of input.
Yes. So do you have any other ideas where you might want to apply this sort of thinking? Do you have any ideas of where you want to take this?
Where I'm looking using systems thinking for horse welfare. So I've done some work in horse training and how we could use a systems thinking approach with regards to horse training and evaluating where the opportunities lie to improve horse welfare with regards to training, because often it's quite aversive, some of the methods or many of the methods that are used. So looking for ways that we can tackle that from a systems point of view.
Because I have another question here that asks about how would you propose to teach system thinking to those involved in the animal care industry, and in particular veterinary students? Is there a way that we can teach people this type of thinking and how they should apply it?
I think that absolutely there's ways to teach it. It's really just, I guess, providing the opportunity. Maybe when I finish my doctorate, I can try to find a job as a teacher of systems thinking, you never know. But I think it's really more about creating the opportunities to teach it. I don't think it's difficult to teach at all. It's just as we teach students how to research in the scientific, using the scientific method, we could teach them in the same way how to take a systems approach.
Okay, and Rashmi, after your talk, I had this feeling of you threw up a lot of questions. You really left us with a lot of questions at the end of, you know, you pointed out some of the problems and some of the pros and cons. But where do you see this might go, and what is needed to implement a system that works out for better welfare for stray dogs and cats in the end?
I think strengthening of the existing government system will help. And as I suggested, there has to be cross-sharing of the data, because what is happening right now is suppose we have created a database of feeders here, and it is being restricted to only that body or institution, and it is not being utilized. Like, those feeders could be contracted by the government for sterilization. In this way, it's very cost effective, because they don't have to do the exercise of collecting number of dogs for taking to sterilization. So I think that cross sharing has to happen.
So how could we do that, you think? You got any ideas? What needs to happen for that?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of technology is being used nowadays, to create such systems. So even veterinary science has to take help of technological solutions to creating a software which can bridge the gap between, which has access to the government and the private veterinary practitioner, like a centralized digital system which can exchange the data. We don't have to do face-to-face all the time. So the government can fund this to, some institution can run this on their own.
It also seems maybe a bit of a wicked problem, so maybe that's where some of Karen's systems thinking might provide some of the solutions as well. I've got another question here from Carol Wilcox for Karen. Regarding systems thinking, this approach to thinking about animal welfare may encourage more drastic changes to welfare issues. For example, taking horses out of stables rather than treating a group, I think, which might get more resistance from practitioners and also in the application. How do you think you can approach that way and not scare people off from this way of thinking, and for it being maybe too radical, or maybe outside the way they are thinking about problems as well?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and it's certainly something that's really front of mind in my research, because obviously we need to take people along with us on the journey for how we do improve horse welfare, and there are so many entrenched practices that we know perhaps don't have such great outcomes for horses. So one of the key, and I think that's perhaps one of the strengths of the systems approach, is that it's very much a participatory approach. So it's about involving industry and horse owners in the research process. So I guess rather than having a solution imposed on people, you involve people in developing the solutions. So I think that that's definitely something that we have to be really careful about as researchers, that we don't alienate owners and the horse industry, but at the same time, we need to still work with them to improve horse welfare, because there are definite issues within the industry. So I think that is one of the strengths of the systems approach. But another aspect of the systems approach, which I didn't really discuss, is the idea of we need a whole diversity of thinking So it isn't just, just one approach. So we need many approaches, and hopefully through having that and seeming more balanced and including the industry, then hopefully we can come up with some, make some progress.
So it seems like you don't just need to teach veterinary students about system thinking, but then also how to teach them how to communicate the way of thinking as they make suggestions.
Absolutely, yeah, because as I was saying, sort of those assumptions that we use in our scientific approach are largely the assumptions that everybody in our society has. So it's about how we can communicate that in a way where we don't alienate people, and we help them on the journey to see what the problems are and how we can create, because otherwise we're not going to have a horse industry. We have to make the horse industry ethically sustainable, or we won't have a horse industry, probably not in my lifetime, but down the track. So we need to take people on that journey and see how we can develop it so that it is more ethically sustainable.
So do you see, like I can see within the horse industry, people have different attitudes towards their animal because it's an animal they love and care about. How do you see the application in more the commercial livestock industries, for example?
Of systems thinking in the livestock industry? Yeah, well, I think it's the same thing, and it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit similar to Helen Beattie, who was presented on the first day. Her approach reminded me very much of a systems thinking approach to welfare, and I can't for the life of me think now what the species she was talking about, but she was definitely talking about it in agriculture. I think there are definite applications, and it's the same thing. It's about, you have to involve farmers in the issue and then use that approach, because often when you come up with a solution, what might be a solution to one aspect of the problem then creates a problem for someone else in the chain, in the system, if you like. So I think it definitely has applications in agricultural animal welfare or production animal welfare as well.
Yeah. So how do you see that, Rashmi? Do you see an application for that in the subject that you talk about, the way we treat stray dogs and cats? Is your mind ticking over maybe to see how you could apply some of that?
Yeah, there is a good scope to take this framework of system thinking and traditional science. Maybe I just have a question for Karen, that because the system is made by people, society, and the society structure is also a very important part of it. Will a sociological or sociology aspect be also involved along with ecology?
I'm sorry, I just didn't catch the last bit of your question, Rashmi. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I'm asking whether the sociological aspect is also involved along with ecology and system thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's that diversity of voices in the room to tackle the problem, because it's not just the veterinary students, view. It is absolutely the sociological view, and it's through having that diversity that we can create a really comprehensive and nuanced picture of what the problem really is. Because if we just solve it from the veterinary point of view, exactly as you point out, maybe there's some sociological implications there that we haven't considered, and that then makes the solution not workable, or we create another problem that we then have to go and solve because we haven't considered that other aspect of the problem. So absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. It was a great question.
All right, Kat, I'm not sure whether Shari is coming back. I've got a couple of questions for her, but I take it she
I'm here. I managed to get
in.
Can you hear me? Yes.
I just can't see you.
Yes,
Okay.
sorry.
Thanks for coming back, because I've got a couple of interesting questions for you too. One question here is from, I missed the name. I didn't copy the name over. Let me see who asked the question. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's about someone who recently convened the welfare committee within the Australian Society for Fish Biology. And you would think that that audience, research and industry, that they would have been interested in it, they would have been keen, but it took them more than 3 years to get it off the ground. And so the feeling was that maybe there's an innate fear associated with animal welfare, and maybe the feeling that animal welfare may be aimed at shutting down research in terms of thinking about animal welfare, considering animal welfare, maybe shutting down research. What are your thoughts about the fear that people might have?
So I think foundational to any research is good welfare, and that without good welfare, our results are more likely to be confounded or non-repeatable or non-reproducible. And there's a whole body of literature that is now coming out to demonstrate that the way we manage animals and having poor welfare in animals or subpar welfare is actually affecting our experimental results. So while there is definitely I think some concerns around if we highlight welfare in research animals, people might end up wanting to shut it down. I think this whole movement to better welfare, to improve research outcomes, and the whole transparency projects that are underway currently in Europe, which are much more advanced than what we have in Australia. But here in Australia, we're trying to increase the openness and transparency of research so that we can show people why we still need to use animals in research and teaching. And that if we are going to use them, we're going to use them as well as we can and take care of them. So I think it's actually a good opportunity to promote good research via the vehicle of good welfare. But it can be tricky for some people if they have that fear. And I think that's where an open discussion amongst different groups of people and showing them that body of literature and showing them what can happen when it's done appropriately can really be beneficial. But it can be a fear. Yeah, absolutely.
Righto. Yeah, thanks for that. And I know as a researcher myself, I do know that sometimes having to comply with all the different welfare requirements for trials can be difficult. And I know how necessary it is as an animal welfare researcher. So I can see on the one hand there may be some fear associated with it, as in limiting some of the things that you might want to do. But as you pointed out, we need good welfare. For one, because we need to make sure the results are applicable, and also to even justify being able to do research with animals, of course. Shari, I just had a question too. You talked about the Grimace scores a couple of times within your presentation without elaborating on it. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, and also the practical application of it within research as a welfare indicator?
Yes, so Grimace scales is something that is garnering a lot of attention, and it is an area that is expanding in research in both the species that have Grimace scales available, as well as the types of research that it's been validated for use in. And as part of this project, we're trialing we're using the Grimace scales as a pilot to see the best way that we can try and train people to improve their ability to identify animals with welfare compromise, and to see if it actually also changes perhaps their attitudes or knowledge towards animal welfare by using training in animal welfare indicators.
Okay, so if they know what they're looking at and how it relates to animal welfare, they may be more.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think what we have a lot of is oftentimes we have this gap, which has been shown in other work, that people want to do the right thing, but they don't always know what the right thing is, or they might not be recognizing when animals are in distress or compromise. So if we can help bridge that gap, then we're going to get better welfare, we're going to get better research. I think it's going to be better retention of staff as well, because there's a lot of compassion fatigue and in staff that are in animal care positions. So I think it's a win-win. It can be a win-win for everybody.
Okay, thank you all for your contribution. It was very interesting, very challenging talks about different aspects of animal welfare. And I think, Kat, you want to talk this one out and take us to the next session?
Great, thank you very much, Ellen. Thanks for chairing this session. It's been fascinating to hear about all these different ways that we can think about changing animal welfare. Thanks very much to our speakers, to Rashmi, to Karen and to Shari for joining us, and to the excellent questions that have been coming through. It's been a great session. We'll take a 15-minute break now, so I look forward to joining you again for our last session of today and our last session of our workshop. In the meantime, freshen up and settle down to finish off our wonderful 3 days together. Thanks. See you soon.
Thanks, Kat.
I leave.